Tim's kinda dumb. Let's help him get smart. It's time to teach Tim stuff. Hey, welcome to Time to Teach Tim. We got Liam Wolfe in the house.
You have a theme song on standby for every intro. You just press a button.
Yeah.
Oh, dude,
I can do crowd noise too if you want thunderous applause.
Could we get one?
I think it's this one.
Oh yeah, there we go. Woo! Yeah, this is sick.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, I have nothing but good things to say about the Zoom PodTrack P4. Sponsor me.
Get a sponsor. Get going. Get that money, baby.
So you're here today to teach us about the history of punk rock.
I'm gonna attempt. Because for those who are unaware, I am a degenerate like most other people, and so my favorite music genre is punk rock music. I had several topics I wanted to come in with, but seeing Richard Dweck make you rot your ears out with fucking Power Rangers lore made me want to put a gun in my mouth. Yeah. So I was like, you know what? Let's do something that other people would enjoy. So I spent about, I want to say, a week and a half doing notes for this podcast.
You are by far the most prepared guest.
I have a whiteboard in the corner if we need any sort of assistance. But I've been prepared. We have been preparing this day for, like, this is like Normandy right now. I feel like I'm about to go storm the beaches.
Yes, Winston Churchill will be stopping by.
Giving his blessing.
Yeah.
But
so how did you get into punk rock? How did you start listening?
Well, I used to be a metalhead. When I was younger and when I was a libertarian. We don't talk about the dark times. I used to listen to a lot of heavy metal, and then I think like around middle school, I found the Dead Kennedys. I found DK. I found the Ramones. I binged the hell out of Fresh Fruits, Rotting Vegetables. My eardrums are still ringing from Kill the Poor. That song kicks so much ass. I just tried to find more and more and more intense stuff. I also used to like download a bunch of shit from LimeWire back in the day. The good old fashioned proto-post Napster piracy platform LimeWire that gave you like more fucking worms in your computer than it did actual content. But I just started like listening to a bunch of that stuff, and then just sort of as I was getting older, by the time I hit high school, I started to realize, like, no disrespect to my metalhead friends out there and people out there, but metalheads are cunts. Like,
right.
They are absolute pieces of shit who, like, they platform this idea of, like, oh, yeah, we're all inclusive, it's all great, but they parade around sexism and homophobia, and the amount of times I was called queer just because I listened to Def Leppard is just enough for me to be like, you know what, you guys are a bunch of dicks, fuck you.
Meanwhile, Def Leppard's like the forefather of all the music they listen to.
Oh, yeah, no, meanwhile, Def Leppard was, like... Oh my God, there's so much shit about Def Leppard. Like, did you know they had, like, this is just off topic, but Def Leppard, this is why I hate glam metal. Fuck glam metal. All those bands were, like, uber pedophiles. Like, they were the proto-pop punk crew of the pop punk crew. So, like, Def Leppard, for instance, underneath their drum rig, they'd have, like, a pit. They'd call it the pit, and they'd lure, like, all the groupies down there. And right before sets and right after sets and even during sets, they'd go down there, fuck like a 16-year-old, come back up and do shit. So like this is like they like look, no one looks at it because it's glam metal, because they're like, yeah, it was all about the pussy, we didn't want to make music, we just want to make all right, Vince Neil, go fuck yourself, fuck Motley Crue. But like
I gotta say, that honestly sounds like the QAnon theory of glam metal.
Oh no, dude, it's I mean, like, you listen to a lot of these guys, like you listen to like Motley Crue, you listen to Poison, you listen to all these people, you ask them why they got into music, and almost all the time they're like, yeah, we just wanted to get girls, man.
Yeah,
we just wanted to get girls. Bro. And I think, at least back in the 80s, a lot of that was just like, because also too, like, the groupie culture was a thing even in the 70s. Like, David Bowie was fucking 14-year-olds. Led Zeppelin notoriously, like, Jimmy Page had, like, a 16-year-old on standby to fuck, and he locked her in hotel rooms for months at times. So metal and, like, yikesy sex is kind of the thing. And So I just sort of kind of got like disillusioned by the metal scene.
Yeah.
I was sort of frustrated with like, because at the time too, that was when like screamo was becoming big. That's when like emo core and like your Suicide Silences and all the bands that were like screaming and shouting about how they hate their parents were coming out. And I was just like, this is like, I don't appeal to this stuff. This isn't my thing. And I sort of like moved over more towards like I was still listening to Slipknot. I was still a Limp Bizkit head, don't get me wrong. I'm Red Camp Army all the way, but I was listening to like Dead Kennedys all the time. I was listening to early Black Flag a lot. I was listening to like old school Adolescents, Descendants, Offspring, Green Day. I actually remember when I was like 10 years old, I got one of my first memories of like a good gift was I got Nimrod and American Idiot like as a joint gift. And those were my first CDs I ever owned.
Oh, wow.
So like that started my collection into like music and stuff. And it's a fun genre. It's a good genre, I think, overall. Like there's not a lot of like yikesy areas. We'll talk about the pop punk things later maybe, but it's mostly not yikesy. I will talk about the neo-Nazi stuff. It's mostly not yikesy, but it's
a lot of it's about inclusivity and
at least modern punk at the very least. Like back in the early days, or at least like as we could probably get started with this, the idea of like punk rock was sort of just like extreme outward offensiveness. Where like you had I was doing the research for this, made me want to rot my brain out, and a lot of these people were saying like, like punk started with Jerry Lee Lewis in the 50s and like Chuck Berry doing the chicken coop dance. That's punk rock. Fuck that. Punk arguably started back in the 60s, like in the mid or maybe a little bit early, but mid to late 60s. You had a few bands in particular coming out of like the hippie bands, the hippie culture. And the prominent bands out there was from New York, you had the Velvet Underground, which very much dealt with like the life in the gutters themes that you hear in a lot of other punk rock later on. A lot of stories about poverty, drug abuse, depression, etc. But also they had like such like an avant-garde tone to them.
Very artsy,
very crafty. Lou
even
Reed.
like Andy Warhol, I think, did like their first album cover.
He was the producer, I think.
Really?
He did a lot. Like he basically kind of made the Velvet Underground like his baby, that was his musical collaboration, which is like one of the good things that Andy Warhol did out of the like three things that he did that was good. So I fucking hate Andy Warhol, but out of those two, there's Velvet Underground, there's the MC5, which were a big band out of Detroit, Michigan, who their most prominent song was "Kick Out the Jams." It's a great song. It kicks ass. You've probably heard of it. You probably heard of the intro, and that's where the punk rock energy came from. They got into a lot of heat because on the album release, the start of the thing would be "Kick out the jams, motherfucker!" Da-na-na-na. And this was when like you say "damn" and you get blacklisted from shows. So like having an album start be like, "Yeah, all right, kick out the jams, motherfucker," blew everyone's mind. And it comes out with this raw, punch you in the face energy. They took like the psychedelic flow of soul and they infused it with the hard rock that would later like come into play in the 70s more so. And then the prominent one, probably the bigger name that really influenced all of it was the Stooges. Iggy Pop. Another Michigan band. I don't know what the fuck's going on in Michigan that's making all these people go crazy.
It's just cold and upsetting.
I mean, I guess, sure. But like, they were very much the like they were sort of what punk would be. Like you'd have Iggy Pop is like the ultimate punk rock frontman. I very much, I have a soft spot for Jello Biafra. We'll get to that later. And I always loved Henry Rollins. I love there's some good people. And I've appreciated a few others by doing this research, like Joey Ramone. We'll get to him later. But Iggy Pop takes that energy that you get, the wild, raucous insanity, And he took that rock and roll mold and was like, yeah, let's just blow up the rules. Let's just say fuck it. He would go on stage, light himself on fire, fucking throw fucking firecrackers at people, take his dick out. Like, he's nuts. He was a fucking nutcase. And it was him. It was, I forget the other guys' names. They're the guitarist who would always wear like a Nazi outfit on stage. Pretty yikesy. Again, punk is usually great, but there's some yikesy parts. We'll get to that. He would wear this Nazi outfit, Iron Cross and everything, and it was sort of like a giant fuck you to the system. So those were
just trying to be offensive.
Yeah, trying to be offensive for the sake of being offensive, for the sake of like just getting that like raw energy out there.
Yeah, and I think that kind of came like on the tails of the peace and love hippie. Like every swing has a counter swing. And I think love everybody. Like, and then you realize in that scene, people are just as dark and dirty and depraved as anybody else. And then the punk kind of swing back with like, hey, we're fucking human beings. We're all have like a shit side to us. So fuck you for thinking you're special or unique or better. We're going to show you what we are.
Yeah, I think, pretty close. A lot of the 60s nihilism, and a lot of the 60s nihilism you get with a lot of those bands from that time, like the Velvet Underground, Stooges, MC5, came out of this like energy of you had the hippie culture who thought that they were going to solve the world by giving everybody a fucking flower and doing 5 tabs of acid while jerking each other off. Yeah. They thought they were going to solve the world's problems. And then 69 rolled around and you have Altamont, which is one of the you want a story and a half, Altamont. Get somebody on, get KP Burke or something, and just talk about Altamont. The Rolling Stones hiring the Hells Angels to be guards for a music festival. What could possibly go wrong?
Nothing.
Charles Manson, murder, the Charles Manson, Sharon Tate, LaBianca murders, huge deal. And then the death of Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. So by the tail end of the 90s into the 70s, not the 90s, the 60s into the 70s, tail end of the 60s into the 70s, like, there's nothing to look forward to. There's nothing to look forward to. And that's when the Stooges release their fucking seminal self-titled album with 1969, Now I Want to Be Your Dog, Secret, like all the bangers.
Yeah.
Comes out of this like, fuck, there's nothing to look forward to. The world fucking sucks. This is the aftermath of the hippie generation.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So going from the Stooges, I don't really like. I know a little bit. I'm trying to remember the song because it's such like it could sum up the Stooges perfectly. I'm not gonna remember.
Now I want to be your dog.
What's it? It's something like a nuclear bomb.
Oh, Seek and Destroy.
Seek and Destroy.
I'm a high-powered. Fucking Christ. I'm a street-walking kid with a heart full of napalm. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Yeah,
great song. I love that.
Ass. Kicks ass. And this is just all proto-punk.
Yeah,
this is like the first 3 guys because we got beyond that point. You get into the 70s. The nihilism starts to creep in. We can jump a little bit over to the UK for a second. Terrible. It is terrible in the UK at that moment. The Labour Party basically drug the economy to the fucking pits of hell. Yeah. This is way before Thatcher even takes hold. She's about to take hold around like 78, 79. But the Labour Party's fucking up everything. There's racial tension all over the place. Everybody's just miserable and awful. Over in the United States, it's not as bad, but it's going to be by the time 77 rolls around and like the economy's in the shits. New York is a hell pit. Yeah. So like nihilism is running rampant. And this is where you get bands like the New York Dolls who take kind of like this swaggery, like Rolling Stones-esque, like elaborate, like, oh yeah, we're cock rock guys, and then they speed it up to 11. They like dose it with a bit of speed, and you get some fucking kick-ass tracks out of that. The New York Dolls end up becoming a major influence in UK punk because a lot of the UK bands end up idolizing the New York Dolls. They idolize Johnny Thunder, who was a heroin addict. Rest in peace, Johnny Thunder. Much love. But Johnny Thunder, one of the best guitarists in punk rock. Troubled man. They idolized the New York Dolls. They idolized Richard Hall and the Voidoids. Richard Hell and the Voidoids? I got this in here somewhere. I think I said Richard Hall and the Voidoids. Who Richard Hall was one of the members of this band Television, who would later go on to make his own solo work. He wrote this song Blank Generation, which would become a punk rock like anthem from like 77 to like 80.
All right.
So they like the New York scene started to influence the UK scene here, and this is all way before the Ramones even touch fucking bass.
I feel like the Ramones kind of capitalize on the scene more than they really do anything to change it. Like they're more like there is this opportunity for a somewhat mainstream abrasive punk rock band, because punk had its rumblings among like people, like you hear about this thing called punk rock, huh? And the Ramones are just like, we'll be the poster child for it.
Well, even then, like when the Ramones got popularity, punk wasn't even really a term. It wasn't until the Sex Pistols took over when punk became kind of like an all-encompassing term and word. The Ramones came in. We might as well get to this. I'm just going to skip through a few of this. The CBGB scene in New York is sort of where the Ramones...
Because that's where like the New York Dolls come out of too.
It's where the New York Dolls come out of. This is where Suicide comes out of, who's a proto-punk, like no-wave art band. They're kind of trippy. You should check them out. Patti Smith, Horses, great poet. Television, which is like proto-post-punk, ostensibly. You get the Talking Heads, you get Blondie, and then the Ramones come in, and little-known fun fact, everyone in that band is absolutely stupid. Like, they are low IQ as shit. They come into this place, and everybody's going in, and they're going out, and they think that they're the shit, performing these fast, crazy songs, and everyone in this scene's like, what the... Who are these imbeciles?
I've heard stories where like they go on stage and they're all out of tune, and they do like 2 songs, they scream, and then they're like, "We're done.
Adios, man. Take care." There's so many stories of just them like eating shit, or like in the middle of their set, Joey Ramone knocks over like Johnny's like guitar amp, and like there's footage of them like yelling at each other during sets. People are like, "What is this clown show shit?" Because at the end of it, everybody thought that they sucked.
Yeah.
And then somehow they go over to London and they inspire the Clash, they inspire the Sex Pistols, they inspire that whole entire UK scene. Yeah. Which is wild, because then they come back here and they're getting laughed at.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So, like, punk rock is with having the in-your-face, like, we don't care what you think mentality. Like, you get a lot of people who are like, well, you don't take you seriously, I'm not going to take you seriously.
Oh, of course.
And the odd thing about it is, like, being in, like, punk bands is, like, we take it very seriously. Like, we tried very hard to write it's not easy to write punk rock music. If you need to write something catchy and fast, you need to be talented.
Yeah.
And that's what I think gets overlooked. Like, punk kind of gets written off sometimes. But let me tell you, writing a punk rock song that's catchy, like Rockaway Beach, that's a really good song. It's hear it at any point in your day and not let it not get stuck in your head. Good luck.
You're just gonna get the chorus.
Yeah.
There's some days I'm just putting stuff on the shelf at my job, and I'm just humming like, "We're a happy family, we're a happy family, we're a happy family. Me, mom, and dad, sitting in Queens eating fried beans." It's so simple that you just remember all the lyrics, and you're like, "Fuck." okay, this is an earworm.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yep.
Which is great because they were trying.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
the funny part is that they were like, no, this is some high art shit.
We don't care. We try really hard to make sure you know we don't care.
What's up, man? And Joey Ramone had like this presence to him. Like everybody in that band had something going on. Like Tommy was like the brainchild. He was the guy who was like making the sound for them. He was the producer guy. He had the connections. Johnny Ramone was the de facto leader. Also, giant piece of shit. Fuck Johnny Ramone.
Yeah, you heard it here, folks.
It's a long story. He ends up like Joey Ramone, softy, young guy, kind of an introvert, had crippling OCD, but like somehow comes out and just like gives these welting like bowels of just like fucking pure fire energy.
Yeah.
And then Dee Dee Ramone, who was the main songwriter for everybody, guy like huffed glue till he was just brain damaged. Poor fucking soul, but like the guy was like, he knew how to write an earworm. He knew how to write these lyrics, 53rd and 3rd, song about like hooking on the side, like selling your body for smack. That's really what Dee Dee did. He sold his body for smack. Now I want to sniff some glue. Guess what? What Dee Dee was doing about 50% of the time that he was alive. He knew what the fuck he was writing about.
Yeah.
He was writing life in the gutter jams it like a fast tempo way.
Yeah.
They all had like a little bit of them built the band to have this energy and this aura that like you don't really expect in a lot of things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Which sucks because, like, I remember back in high school, like, somebody came up to me and was like, do you like the Ramones? I always thought they were fucking corny. I hated them so much.
Well, that's what's surprising, like, about, like, older punk rock. A lot of it is, like, to today's standards, like, really corny. But I think that's a product of, like, what punk rock created more so than what it was.
Oh, yeah.
Because, like, I mean, I don't want to get into it, but like I feel like once punk rock made that turn toward hardcore, then all of a sudden, like, beginning punk rock was like, this stuff is kind of soft.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like there was still a lot of bands from like the 70s and the early 80s. They were way more artsy. They were way more like, it's just we're going to do our little thing. We're going to be experimental, but we're going to let this rage out. And it's going to be like this really artsy thing. Like you got bands like the Bags from LA who would take like a lot of like Chicano culture and put it into their music. You got the Screamers who did a lot of like really intense songs, but they didn't have a guitarist. They had 2 synthesizers and a drummer and the lead singer. They had no guitarist, no bassist, and they fucking killed. They were awesome. And you had a lot of these bands. You had X. You had a lot of these LA bands. And then I guess it's just like the fusion of Reagan taking over, the hell maw of being in poverty. A lot of these suburban youth kids just came around, and you're like, fuck this boring shit.
Yeah.
Like, give me that fast. Like, give me something that I feel inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's sort of where hardcore comes in. We'll get to more about hardcore a little bit later.
Yeah.
But so the Ramones happen. CBGB's is blowing up. You get like Blondie coming out of there. Talking Heads, Television. You get a lot of bands. The Dead Boys, who no fucking Dead Boys. There's a bunch of bands, and it was all about like this energy of like you're seeing the life around you. Because by the time they were getting big, 1977 rolled around. New York in 1977 is probably up until today the worst it's been in fucking years. Yeah. There were graffiti on the walls. You couldn't walk like 2 blocks away from your house without either getting mugged or assaulted. Like gangs were running all over the place. Yeah. Heroin was huge. Drugs were crazy. Like fucking prostitutes were just hanging around. Like it was a degenerate's paradise.
Yeah.
People like me would love it. But you look around at this stuff and you just see all the trash and all the like pain, and you're like, fuck. And then they just let it out somehow. And that's how that punk energy from that CBGB's scene built into something larger. And as you take the energy from New York and you move it over to the UK, where by the late 70s, Thatcher's about to take control. The conservatives are taking control. They resent the youth. They resent the working class who are living in poverty and shit. There's no money to give to like normal public utilities. The garbage men, for instance, were on strike. So they would just take the garbage, go over to like a park, and just throw garbage there.
Yeah,
So you're walking around, and you just see like mountains of garbage, months at a time. And it's like you look at this and you see the riots, and if you're living in Ireland and you're getting bombarded by British troops on a nightly basis with gunfire and tanks and all this shit, like there's no fucking hope in the UK.
Yeah. This is around the time the IRA. Right?
IRA started to become a thing, more or less in the 80s, but like this is where it's starting to become a thing. Yeah. Where it's more so like Ireland's like, fuck this bullshit after like almost 100 years of being subjugated and being second-class citizens. Are like, fuck this bullshit. But like it's like a lot of poverty, a lot of strikes, unfortunately, a hell of a lot of racism. And out of that came like just this nihilistic outlook on life. There's no hope. And here comes this guy, Malcolm McLaren, who was over in the United States. Malcolm McLaren ends up going back to the UK. He opens this shop called Sex. He's sort of like a fashionista guy, this guy, Malcolm McLaren. He used to have an old store. I forget the name of it, but it was like a mod store.
Yeah.
Like for the mod scene where people would show up and have like the fucking pompadour haircut and like, look at me, I'm a 50s guy in the 60s.
Suit, skinny tie. Yeah.
And then he came back over and he made this shop called Sex, which is a lot of like BDSM gear, a lot of torn T-shirts. He took a lot of influence from the new UK scene. Not the UK, the US scene, the New York scene. And he said, you know what, we can fucking do this here. And so he found this band. I forget the name of them. It's the Sex Pistols. It's going to become the Sex Pistols.
Yeah.
But he found this like pub band, brought them on. They found John Lydon. They were like, yo, you want to audition for this band? He's like, fucking whatever. It's like, no, it's not like I have any hope anyway.
Yeah.
They come in. They become the Sex Pistols. And they end up like taking over the music scene in the UK, because then after they start doing their underground tours, out comes The Clash with Bernard Rhodes as their manager. Because here's the thing you're going to have. This is the thing I want to clarify here too. A lot of people say like, who started punk rock, United States or the UK? And genuinely speaking, the United States did start the sound of punk rock, and more so it was genuinely authentic in the United States. UK scene, the thing people have to understand is that the two biggest bands, actually the three biggest bands, because I think the Damned also had a manager too, the three biggest bands in the UK punk scene were all made by managers. They were basically like proto K-pop groups. They were artificially made things.
Yeah.
They weren't actually fucking like anything of worth. As opposed to like the New York scene where it's like a bunch of guys from the Bowery who are walking out of a trash dumpster being like, yo, you want to play guitar tonight? Sure, whatever.
Yeah.
So like...
I feel like also like that's, if you look at European music's roots, like even like the Beatles, like they were a constructed thing.
Yeah.
You know, like I feel like that might be like a product of their culture, like where there is the king, quote unquote, and then the feudals, but I don't know what to call
the peasants.
Yeah,
as they will.
he controls them, and America's very like, well, if you want something done, you got to do it yourself, son. You know?
Pull yourself by your bootstraps.
Yeah.
What if I don't have any bootstraps?
Yeah. But it is interesting that, because like you always hear the Sex Pistols as like the people who started punk rock, but then like you hear like the stories like, no, really, it was like you said, kind of
this New York scene.
Yeah, the idea was taken, and then
like you wouldn't have the Sex Pistols without the New York Dolls and the Ramones.
Yeah.
Like that's almost based on my research, my magazine length research. It's the truth. The
Yeah.
proof is in the pudding. These bands were inspired by these New York bands. It's almost evident. But like they ended up becoming a huge thing. Johnny Rotten becomes like the face of like youth anarchy and just like fuck everybody, fuck this
Yeah.
bullshit. They bring on Sid Vicious later after their previous bassist is like, I don't want to do this anymore, and John Lydon's like, you're a pussy, and they kick him out. So they bring in Sid Vicious, who can't play a fucking lick of bass. They bring him onto the band, and the band just like they get this notoriety a little bit before Sid Vicious joins. They go on this TV show. They go on this late show. I have it here. They go on this late show. I forget what the name of it is. I think it's like Tory Tonight with like Bill Donnelly or some shit. I don't know the host's name, but they come on the show and they're like, "Oh, here's the Sex Pistols. So what do you got to say?" And they're swearing like a motherfucker. The interview lasts 56 seconds. It lasts 56 seconds because, like, the guitarist for the band just goes, "Oh, you manky fucker. Fuck you." Just says this, wearing, like, a Tits t-shirt.
Yeah.
Susie Sue from Susie and the Banshees is, like, one of their groupies hanging out with them. Like, that scene alone, that interview alone blew up the UK punk scene.
Yeah.
Because after that, you get The Damned, you get bands like Susie and the Banshees, you get Joy Division coming into play, a lot of these post-punk bands that are starting to come out. You get the Adverts, you get Alternative Television, you get like a lot of these like excess bands that are coming out of this UK punk scene that are just like, we're punk too, motherfucker, fuck you, yeah. Who John Rotten will later say he resented every single one of them and said they all should have probably jumped off a fucking bridge.
Yeah.
And
They're all posers.
they're all posers. The Sex Pistols were the only real fucking band. Everybody else was a fucking ripoff. That's
Yeah, sure.
ya manky bastard. But yeah, he builds this scene. You get a bunch of these names coming out. More of the prominent names out of this UK scene. You get Generation X, which is fronted by Billy Idol,
Yep.
famed '80s hair rock god Billy Idol. White Wedding. I will stand Billy Idol to this day. I don't care if he's a sellout. He's a king. You get Susie Sue, Susie and the Banshees, who we'll talk about later in goth rock. Joy Division, post-punk icons. You get the Damned, who are kind of like these like kind of proto-goth horror rock, but also just very much like just post-punky, like art aesthetically. They sort of, their first album started being like this edgy fuck you thing, and they were actually the first punk band to release a single. New Roses is the first punk rock single, I believe.
Oh.
So yeah, in the UK scene.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you got Sham 69, who we'll talk about when we get to Oi Punk. Who boy, I can't wait to talk about Skinheads. And the Buzzcocks, who were sort of like the first pop punk band.
Yeah. Yeah.
With Ever Fallen in Love, really fantastic band. Awesome guys. But yeah, so there's that. UK punk's really cool. It's getting big, but I also have to preface too, they also really liked to wear swastikas and be uber racist and miserable.
Well, that's a weird thing. So like, I guess that comes in like the beginning of the 80s, right? Like
do you mean?
with like the skinhead punk rock.
Yeah, that comes around Oi Punk. That's sort of where that starts out, but it definitely originated in UK punk. It later ended up all over the fucking world, but UK punk, specifically Oi Punk, sort of got this reputation because of how fast and how hard hitting it became, because it was sort of, Oi Punk was the UK's version of hardcore.
Yeah.
Ostensibly. And so Oi Punk started to gather around the working class people, and at the time the working class people mostly were white middle class men who were really pissed off that these Pakistani guys are taking over all our jobs. And so then the skinhead movement started to kick up, and skinheads, there's two types of skinheads. There's the ska skinheads, who were just mostly like, we just want to be loitering dickheads, but we're not racist, we just like the music. And then there's Zeke Heil, 1488 psychopaths who ended up ruining the Oi Punk image.
Yeah. Which it's like a interesting. So like I feel like punk has always done this really well, where it takes like underheard voices,
Yeah,
and become like a soapbox for them.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, like because there's the anger and frustration of not being heard,
Yeah.
and then you find, oh, there's other people that feel the same way, and I can yell and scream about this, and I can get out my frustration. And there's like a great movie. I can't remember the name of it. It's about pretty much like England, early '80s, dealing with racism.
This is England?
Yes.
That
Yeah.
movie's great.
Yeah.
That movie's great. I love it.
Check it out. It's it wasn't like
It's got
what
Al Capone from Boardwalk Empires as the main antagonist.
Oh, really?
He's fucking dope.
did not know
I
that.
don't remember the guy's name. I think his name's like Michael Irons or something.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like, great actor, awesome actor, and he is a terrifying son of a bitch in that
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah. But yeah, you see like a lot. It's really like it's a great little. It's almost like a time capsule for like that moment in history.
Yeah.
You know, because you start to see like the ghettos of London, the suburbs we would call them here, but it's row housing pretty
yeah.
much. Like I feel like row housing did more to help punk rock than any other structure. Like because like you look at like what is the show that's really popular in America now, but it had a British first?
With Skins? Not
no,
Skins.
Shameless.
Shameless. There we go.
Like the British version is all just like about people living in the Gallagher family living in the row houses.
Yeah.
And it's like the tail end of punk. I think it's like early 90s is when it's like it was started to be filmed. But there's still like the racism that they're dealing with, you know, the sexual inclusivity that they're dealing with, you know, the drug use that they're dealing with, but they don't deal it in a punk rock way. They kind of go more on the pop side of things, the club scene. But it really kind of gives you an idea of the birthplace. Like if you don't understand being a punk,
Yeah.
like I feel like nothing can explain that more than systematic poverty.
Yeah. No.
I feel like that is, if you want to understand what punk rock really is, you have to learn who the people are and where they come from.
You want to understand how to, like, there's the whole thing with, like, poser culture and stuff where people are like, oh, yeah, you're just wearing it to be like, which is kind of a big thing with the UK scene, was that it sort of became a fashion statement. Everybody was wearing the leather jackets with the studs and the mohawk and the spiky hair.
Plaid bondage bands.
The plaid bondage bands.
Which I had. I had a pair of those. I wore them twice and got made fun of. This is in the era of UFO pants.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, the raver pants. Jesus Christ.
Damn, you were getting dissed by people that listen to Fatboy Slim. I
Yep.
feel so bad for you.
Yeah. That was my life.
But yeah, it's like a lot of that, like, it sort of became a costume, is sort of what which is what makes, I think, when we get to hardcore, what makes hardcore so fucking cool, because it was like you got that punk rock energy, and here are guys that are wearing like stained T-shirts and like torn jeans, and they're like
their work clothes.
Coming up, just being like, all right, we're gonna sing this song called "Fuck You, Dirty Pig."
Yeah.
But but yeah, no, and so the UK scene starts to become a little bit bigger. A lot of the UK bands start to sort of get influenced and start pumping through the United States. And around 78 is the infamous Sex Pistols US tour, which ended in San Francisco, where the Sex Pistols break up, basically.
Yeah.
The famous, you feel like you've been cheated. What's the line? Johnny Rotten, they basically play No Fun off the Sex Pistols, never mind the Bullocks. Here's the Sex Pistols album. No Fun for like 7 minutes straight. And then at the end of it is like, you ever get the feeling you're being cheated? That's the line. And then after that, they broke up. Because John Lydon's like, fuck this, fuck Malcolm McLaren. He's cheating us and making us into a pop, like commercialized cartoon character. We're not fucking cartoons. Fuck you. He would go on to make Pill, Public Image Limited. We'll probably get to that maybe if I have time. But back over to New York punk. At this point, because of the explosion of the Sex Pistols, punk rock sort of becomes like a thing, and now the Ramones are getting mainstream attention. Blondie is getting mainstream attention. The Talking Heads get mainstream attention, and a lot of the bands from CBGBs are now sort of getting into the mainstream, becoming hit makers. Blondie is being played in fucking discotheques.
Yeah.
And so, like, now...
When does she invent rap? Is that around here?
I want to say, like, 80, 81. That's the worst take. I hate when people go, like, nah, you know who invented rap music? Debbie Harry. She invented rap music. I'm like, you fucking...
Yeah, that's my favorite, like, stupid thing to say. Like, I've seen Blondie. I love Blondie.
Oh, of course,
Blondie did not invent rap. She didn't. It didn't happen.
It was around during the DJ scene of the 70s.
Yeah.
Like Sugar Hill Gang existed, but they didn't have a record label. That's the issue. She hung out in Harlem 3 times and then started to adopt their culture. She invented the music. Okay. Fucking crazed.
Yeah.
But you get these bands coming out, you get television, you get a lot of these bands. They start to become huge hit makers on the radio. And then a bunch of bands start to watch these bands, specifically the Ramones, and then they go back and they make their own bands. You go to D.C., and you have Henry Rollins, you have Ian MacKaye, these guys who basically based their entire career off of the Ramones, being like, you know what, we're going to make our own fucking band. You have Glenn Danzig from the Misfits coming in this bitch. You get a lot of people coming out. But there's also punk around the world at this point, like little droplets here and there.
Yeah.
A few names to point out, Devo. Our friends Devo. I love Devo. They're great.
I don't think I've ever listened to Devo.
Devo's fine. They're nerdy. Like I get like.
Oh wait, is Devo the Whippet?
They're the Whippet
guys.
Right,
yes,
they're the Whippet guys. But like back in the 70s, they were doing like proto new wave.
Yeah.
So it was like a lot of like synths, but it was like upbeat punk. It was almost like pop punk, but it was all like scientific industrial music.
Yeah, more like 80s pop.
It was very 80s pop in like 1978.
Yeah.
So they are very dope. I'm big fan of Uncontrollable Urge. That is a great song. But there's those guys. There's Suicidal Commandos out of Minneapolis who were sort of like a Ramones ripoff band, ostensibly. But they were all right. In Detroit, I want to bring this up because these guys need to get all the fucking credit in the world. There's a little band called Death in Detroit. Back in 1973, they release an album. It doesn't really sell anything. The record label's like, you need to change your name. They're like, no, we're not going to change our name. That's the concept of our band. What the fuck are you talking about? So their album gets released. It doesn't really sell anything. They break up. They go and live their lives, and they go and do other things. And then their album gets lost. And then like 3 decades later in like the 2000s, skate culture comes around. Somebody buys a vinyl collection, finds this album. They go, what the fuck is this? Basically, these guys invented hardcore before hardcore was even a thing. So now all the skater kids who are like listening to fucking Minor Threat and Bad Brains are like, what the hold on. And they start sharing this around and it becomes big. And then it gets a reissue back in like 2013 and they become a big deal all of a sudden. So shout out. Band called Death. Yeah. Awesome band. Kick ass. And so you get a lot of these bands in this East Coast, Midwest range. And now we get to California. California punk, shocker enough, a lot different than New York and LA punk. When it started out, it was very similar to like art punk. There was a lot of like very similar like Suicide or Patti Smith.
All right.
You get a lot of like people just experimenting, but they also had like certain tones to them that were like, what we're gonna just be like, There's also a lot of female fronted bands too. Mm-hmm. So like you get the Bags, you get X, you get like a lot of bands that were like, we're gonna try to do like the Blondie thing, but darker and edgier and meaner and fucking grimier, which is tight. So you get a few bands here. You get Crime, who are like arguably the first California punk band, and they were inspired by like 50s like greaser cultures. So they're all coming out there in like leather jackets, looking like fucking John Travolta from Grease, doing songs. You get Crime, you get the Nuns. You get the Screamers, who I talked about, 2 synthesizers. They still sound more intense than most of the bands coming out today. Fucking awesome. You get the Bags. You get Fear. Now, Fear.
I love
Living in the city.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
God, nothing. I like that is my favorite start to a punk rock song. Just that dark, soulful.
Living in the city. Oh, God. My favorite is I still love New York's all right if you like saxophones. That song kicks so much ass.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunately like mildly like super homophobic, but it's super cool. I love it. They performed, just a split side topic. We talked about the SNL performance or nah.
We've talked about it
on other podcasts that will remain nameless, fellow housemates. Will remain nameless, but basically, Fear, they sort of create like proto-hardcore in California, and they were mostly known for being incredibly antagonistic. Like every live performance you see, they're just like, "Hey, we fucking hate you guys. You're all fucking pieces of shit.
Yeah.
Look
To
at all
their
you
audience.
fairies, you fucking fairies." And then they're basically asking people to jump on stage and beat the shit out of them because their music's so intense. And so they do this and they perform, and it starts to inspire a bunch of other bands to come out. Mainly the Weirdos. You get the Germs, Darby Crash, my boy, Darby Crash. The Germs, who were fucking atrocious. They were terrible live. Like their album, great. What We Do in Secret and fucking Media Blitz is another banger that I love. Mammal, that's the name, not Manimal. Mammal. They have a few great bangers off their debut, but their live performances, their lead singer Darby Crash would get incredibly shit-faced and fucked up before every performance. So like, instead of sounding like the album, it sounds like everybody else is sounding like the album, and like Darby Crash is like 5 speeds behind everyone else.
Well, that's par for the course with a lot of punk rock. I feel like this is a good time to kind of get into like punk rock shows, and well, we mentioned the most famous venue, CBGB's, but
which is now a coffee shop. Fuck you, Brooklyn. But
like I feel like punk rock was always something people are like, well, I'll go check it out, and then either you went to a show and you're like, oh my god, I need to leave now, or oh my god, I belong here.
Yeah.
The punk rock shows, like in this time, especially at the start of hardcore, it was audience on the stage. This is where you get the Nirvana trash the stage energy out of bands. This is where you get like moshing the first start.
Slam dancing becomes big, which then becomes moshing. And also too, like, because before that there was pogoing, which was allegedly invented by Sid Vicious, another wonderful invention that Sid, swastika wearing murderer Vicious, did. But he like the other thing too though with that moshing in the punk rock concerts, especially in the 80s, like what the punk rock shows now, if you can't handle the punk rock shows now, like I got news for you. You think they're hard now with like people backfisting each other and like drop kicking? You go to punk shows in the 80s, specifically like Circle Jerk shows or Black Flag, specifically Black Flag. These are guys who are coming in the pit with chains and knives and brass knuckles, just purposely trying to hurt people. Like this is intimidating shit. So like it's a whole different scene. Like,
there's a great scene in the movie Salt Lake City Punk, one of my favorite movies
SLC,
ever.
baby.
Where they're at like a punk rock show, and I feel like it's a really great vision of what it must have been like then. There's an overhead shot where it's just what looks like fights in the crowd. There's people running across the stage. The singer's like throwing them off the stage. It's just that energy that was around in the 80s. It's funny how it went like one of two ways, where it went like into like hardcore bands or glam rock.
it went into like, if you're talking punk specifically, it went into either like hardcore bands or they turned into new wave bands, and they were associated with fucking Wham, which is heartbreaking because like Blondie's good Talking Heads are great. Susie and the Banshees are basically goth. They're cool,
Yeah.
but no, since you're new wave, you're hanging out with Boy George and George Michaels. Get the fuck out of our face. So like, punk sort of then became just like kind of a glorified sausage fest. But before even that was a thing, like LA was still like kicking ass. You had like the Weirdos, you had the Zeros, you had the Dickies, who were pop punk guys, Banana Split, a pretty good song. X, who I love. They were like proto rockabilly. Nausea's a really great track. There's actually like in probably one of my favorite documentaries of all time, The Decline of Western Civilization. Haven't seen it, check it out. It's fucking awesome. It's sort of like a Spark Notes version of like LA punk, ostensibly. They show footage. This is like a film back in like 79. They're showing actual punk rock concerts and like live footage. And the intro they have is Nausea by X. And the show is the most intense shit because you're just like as guys are fucking walloping each other in the face, throwing each other, like it's nuts.
Yeah.
But like these guys are awesome. The Go-Go's.
Oh yeah.
The fucking Go-Go's were punk, by the way. I don't know you don't know that, but it's the name of the punks. But yeah, you had the Germs kind of were the big one, and then my favorite, Jello Biafra and the Dead Kennedys. You get these guys coming in and they sort of basically make hardcore.
Yeah.
They come in and they sort of establish what would be considered hardcore, which is fast tempos, fast blast beats, punchy, in-your-face rock, but also politically charged. Also very much fuck you in every direction to political systems and to everybody at large. It very much alienating, not necessarily together music.
Yeah.
Jello Biafra, my favorite frontman of all time, the greatest human being in the world. They made some of the most influential music out there. And you wouldn't really have hardcore without the Dead Kennedys. I think that's more or less it. You wouldn't have modern rock or modern punk right now if it wasn't for the Dead Kennedys. I think punk would kind of be considered a fad and it would be like, whatever. Because of the Dead Kennedys, you would get, out of the Dead Kennedys, you get the Circle Jerks, you get Bad Religion, you get Black Flag, who would end up building what would eventually be hardcore.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, next on here, all of hardcore ostensibly just builds itself off of like faster, harder, punching in the face music. It was sort of founded in like Sacramento, in Orange County, in San Francisco, like everywhere around the LA area, but not really the LA area. Yeah. It was mostly what they would call it suburban punk originally, because a lot of those bands were like, they were coming out of suburbs, and they were having fucking VFW back hall shows and going to like abandoned buildings to perform rock. And most of them were living out of fucking like vans and shit. But they sort of became a thing, and it sort of changed the tide to punk rock. It changed what punk was from being like, oh, there's the artsy fartsy stuff. There's the guys with 2 cents. Oh, that's cool. No, fuck all that shit. We're going to have 4 guys on stage who all look like they just came out of an Arby's the other day, and they're going to sing like 37 songs in 15 minutes, and you're going to fucking like it.
Yeah. They all just got off their construction jobs.
Yeah.
And they're ready to let loose.
They are ready to punch people in the goddamn throat.
And this is when you mentioned the political aspect. This is really when punk kind of forms an identity.
Yeah.
As far as like, I feel like a lot of like the early stuff is like, fuck you, we don't care. And now it's like, fuck you, we care.
Yeah. It's a lot of, it goes from the nihilistic, oh, look at the swastika on my chest, I'm so fucking cool. And there were still some attitudes like that. Like Keith Morris from Circle Jerks, my second favorite front man of all time. Great human being, awesome person. Total douchebag. Total dickhead. He would go on and he'd be like, yeah, we're the fucking Circle Jerks. This is cool, I guess. Whatever. Here's some songs, you fucking pieces of shit. 1, 2, 3, 4, and they just like go into like Red Tape or fucking Live Fast, Die Young, and it just really punchy songs like that. But yeah, you're right. It went from this fuck you, I'm gonna piss off my parents, all this stuff, to like, no, fuck Reagan, fuck the people that are fucking us. I want a better life for myself.
Yeah.
And this is, I don't like how things are going. I'm going to tell you why things are bad. And you get that out of Jello Biafra talking about like how we're how our society is sort of a military complex, or how we kind of want to feed off the poor and let the poor die and kill the poor, or chemical warfare, or any of the other like highly politicized stuff that got them banned from fucking record stores.
Yeah.
But you get a lot of these bands. You get you also get like some divergent voices like a little bit later on, but like you get guys like the Minutemen, you get guys like Husker Du who take that hardcore style and are like, yeah, let's like organize it a little bit. Let's not be so fucking angry. We want other people. We don't want people to punch each other in the face. We want them to hear what we have to say. We have feelings, guys.
Yeah.
And so Husker Du came out, Zen Arcade, awesome album. The Minutemen, I love them to death. They're also a really great band. Corona, the Jackass theme guys, for all you people that are like, who are the Minutemen? They're the Jackass theme guys. But they come out. And then one of the bigger names out of the scene are Bad Brains. Bad Brains comes out of Washington, D.C. They're arguably one of the first like African-American hardcore bands.
Yeah.
Like there's apparently like Pure Hell was like a little bit before them, and then a band called Death way before them, but like no one knew about it. Bad Brains became kind of like the East Coast version of the Dead Kennedys. So like the Dead Kennedys was on the West Coast. They were influencing all the bands like Black Flag and Circle Jerks. Bad Brains was taking over DC, and the DC scene ends up building into the straight edge scene, which ends up being fronted by Ian MacKaye and Discord Records, and you get a lot of like Minor Threat, SOA, Government Issued, a lot of like bands that were very much more far leftist, very vegan, very much like don't drink or else we're gonna punch you in the throat type bands. But like Bad Brains took that energy and they brought it to the East Coast, as the Dead Kennedys were taking that energy and bringing it to the West Coast. You also get the Misfits, who founded horror punk, which is one of the goofiest goddamn genres out there. I love it still, but
this is when punk rock really branches out. This is when people take the energy and the kind of the umbrella that is punk rock and extend it into like their own personal interests.
You get so many subgenres out of this. You get so many things. You get like the start of skate punk with the Adolescents, and Agent Orange with surf punk, who are also an awesome band. You should check them out. Social Distortion being rockabilly and starting the rockabilly punk scene. You get Descendants, Bad Religion, who are sort of like the skate punk guys. You also get this thing called Nardcore. Which is apparently supposed to be it's called Oxnard Hardcore. It's shorthand Nardcore because it's a bunch of these bands coming from Oxnard. Wherever the fucking Oxnard, California is, I don't know, but it comes out of there. And it's mostly bands that are kind of more thrashy than they are punk.
All right.
So you're getting like DI, you're getting DRI, you're getting Rich Kids on LSD, which is a great name for a band.
Yeah.
You're getting like Ill Repute. You're getting a lot of these bands that very much are like, are they punk or are they metal? And are they pretty punchy music, but still like they're playing for either team.
Yeah.
You also get like Suicidal Tendencies, who go from being hardcore punk and skate punk to thrash by the end of their career. You get a lot of these bands, TSOL, goth rock, goth punk, horror punk band. Code Blue, one of the first songs about necrophilia in the punk scene. Hell yeah. And then the biggest name in hardcore, Black Flag.
Yeah.
Black Flag, originally fronted by Keith Morris before he went to go do the Circle Jerks.
Oh.
Yeah, they kicked him out because he was an alcoholic. So that ostensibly actually off of Damaged, their first record with Henry Rollins. Their first song on there, one of the first songs on there, Six Pack. My favorite song on there, Six Pack. it's about Keith Morris being an alcoholic. So all the whole song is like $25 and a 6-pack to my name, 6-pack. It's so good. But like, yeah, it's Greg Ginn, who is the founder of SST Records, who sort of becomes like the East Coast equivalent to like Ian MacKay's Discord Records, bringing up a lot of these like independent West Coast artists and building up the hardcore scene or the punk scene in the West Coast.
And this is where you first start to get like zines and like independent labels, like you're saying, like independent labels did so much for punk rock as far as making sure the artists started to get paid and taken care of and like actually were able to make a career.
Yeah.
Because like before this, like punk rock, I mean, unless you were like ready to sell out all the ideals that you literally sang about, you were not going to make a career.
Yep.
Like, you know, like, and whether that's punk rock or not, like you can, if you love music and you love playing music and you want to do that forever, you have to make money doing it.
Exactly. Yeah.
You cannot work a 9 to 5 and go on tour.
Yep. You can't.
It's
you
impossible.
Can't do it.
Yeah.
You have to choose one or the other.
Yeah.
And a lot of these bands were like, we're not commercially viable enough to get on radio. We're going to have to do it independently. And a lot of these bands, like, fun fact, a lot of these bands didn't really make a lot of money.
Yeah,
Like,
no.
They were still dirt poor.
Yeah.
Like, Black Flag, until their run from, like, 80 to 86, before they all broke up and were like, yeah, fuck this, they still were not making money.
Yeah.
They were still pretty poor.
Yeah.
Like, all these bands were, like, super broke. You don't really see a lot of the DIY bands sort of kind of get their own thing until we get to Ian MacKay and Minor Threat, and more specifically Fugazi. We'll get there way later. But rest of this situation, you get Canadian hardcore, which is a thing that exists, but like DOA and the Wipers are kind of the big bands from that scene.
Respect it. Respect Canadian punk. Canadians are people too. I'm sick of this. I'm making a stand here. Canadians are people.
Look, DOA is a cool band and all, but like, do you see how many pages we have left?
Yeah, true. All right.
So, the Wipers out of Portland, in New York. While hardcore was being a thing, New York was doing this thing called no wave. Now, I don't want to spend all day talking about no wave because no wave fucking sucks. No wave is it's noise rock. It's ostensibly punk rock noise rock. So like more like loud, irritating, obnoxious. Like they're saying "fuck you" to your ears as opposed to the system.
Yeah.
You get a few bands out of this, but the most prominent one, because I don't really care about going through all of them. There's Suicide, which was sort of like the proto band, and then the big band out of the scene is Sonic Youth.
Yeah,
which would later inspire a bunch of other bands in the 90s. Sonic Youth, they're all right. I'm not too big on them. But a lot of these bands start to come out, and they start making hits from the CBGB scene. You're getting Young, Loud, and Snotty just releasing back in like 79, I believe. From the Dead Boys, you're getting Chinese Rock hitting some airwaves. It's a co-writing from Rich Hall and Dee Dee Ramone, who are both doing heroin, of course. But you get a lot of stuff. You get horror punk coming in because of the Misfits, New Jersey's own Lodi, baby. But you get the Misfits coming in, and their shows were fucking terrifying. Like the East Coast equivalent to like those Black Flag, like, oh, guys coming in with chains and brass knuckles would be Misfits shows, where they're performing and people are jumping on stage trying to fight Glenn Danzig, and Glenn Danzig just punches the shit out of them.
Yeah.
That's why Glenn Danzig is like super jacked, even though like you hit him once and he'll fall over like a fucking rock.
He needed to be. He needed to defend his mic.
He needed to defend the honor of punk. But you get a lot of these bands out here. You get the Misfits. You get the Undead, who are sort of pioneers of New York hardcore. Sorry, we're not going to get into a lot of New York hardcore in this. I'm sorry. It doesn't really do much in the history, in the long scheme of punk rock history. So I'll just note New York hardcore exists. TSOL, great band. 45 Graves, they did the Party Time song from Return of the Living Dead. That's the only reason why I'm bringing them up. And then you get the Cramps, who are kind of like the second big name in horror punk, which kind of are like more tongue-in-cheek, inspired, like they're inspired by like B movies from the 50s. That's the other thing too with a lot of the horror punk bands. A lot of the bands, they either talk about like really grisly, gruesome shit, or they're talking about, oh, I'm singing a song about Martians running around. Martians.
Oh, the graveyard. It's spooky.
Ooh, yes. We have a ghost inside our head. Dun, dun, dun. But yeah, there's a lot of that. And then DC punk, DC hardcore starts to become a thing. Bad Brains inspires this whole entire scene to go out. And this is where Teen Idols come into play. Teen Idols, being the first straight edge band, started by Ian MacKaye. Yes. Now, what started this whole thing and what made this thing so prominent was that Ian MacKaye, while he was touring with Teen Idols, they were going to the West Coast. And apparently they realized that a lot of the kids that wanted to come in, they're 16, they're 17. They can't go to fucking bars. Yeah. They can't go in and buy drink. This is when the age was 18 years old and not 21 before Ronald Reagan ruined that. Thanks, Ronald. You
just say
fucking
no.
Cunt.
Just say no. Remember, kids, just say no. All right,
say
no. Just want to make sure that we're
I'm glad
commercially
Reagan's
viable.
Dead. But so what happened was they start touring and they realize, hey, hold on. So they go to these promoters and they're like, hey, so what if you find out someone's underage, you put an X on their hand. And if they have an X on their hand, they can't be served alcohol at all. And if they have an alcoholic drink on them, throw them out. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, sure, let's do that. So they start to do that. That becomes the sign of straight edge. Yeah. Straight edge then becomes the big prominent scene in the DC hardcore scene, where you have kids that are like, nah, fuck drinks, fuck smoking, fuck all this. I'm straight edge. I don't need any of that. Fucking bullshit. Shout out Waldo. But yeah, no, you get a lot of these bands who just come out, they're anti-drugs, anti-alcohol, and some of them anti-promiscuous sex.
Yes. And I feel like this is kind of in a response to like what really killed a lot of people with the 70s punk rock era. You're talking about the Ramones and heroin and the Sex Pistols and heroin, and like a lot of that is like, hey, like live a decent life. Like you don't need this to be punk rock. And because like really, I mean, punk rock breeds this environment where everything's okay. Yeah. And if you want to destroy yourself, that's on you.
By the time that like Minor Threat was becoming a thing, which is like 84, like yeah, around that time, you had Sid Vicious dying of heroin. You had Nancy Spungen dying because Sid Vicious stabbed her because he was on heroin. You had Darby Crash, the lead singer of the Germs, overdosing on heroin. You've had Rich Hall being an addict. You have Dee Dee Ramone recovering from it. Like half of the punk rock scene were either on speed, on drugs, or on a mix of both. Yeah. And then West Coast punk was not even any better, with them just chugging beers every day and being like, yeah, fuck you, man. Okay, I don't give a shit. So Minor Threat was sort of a counter reaction to that. They're like, hey, we don't need this fucking shit. We can still stay energized and do this thing without this stuff. And so this is the start of straight edge culture. This is the start of Youth Crew, which was sort of more of a, like, it's straight edge, but it was sort of more prominent in New York hardcore. Yeah. So this is where I talk about the one paragraph I have on New York hardcore. You get guys like Gorilla Biscuits. You get Judge. Judge is sort of the most prominent New York hardcore straight edge band because they very much were like, you know what? All these people are making fun of straight edge kids because, oh, they're too militant. Oh, they're fine. We'll be fucking pieces of shit. So they become the militant straight edge hardcore band who comes out and says, if you smoke, we'll beat you up. If you drink, we'll beat you up. Fuck you.
Yeah.
And so they become a big thing. Youth Brigade, like a lot of these bands that were very much more like, you know, they're hardcore, but they had a positive message.
Yeah.
It was like a punk rock PSA ostensibly.
Yeah.
But it was they were making really decent music, really good music. And then as that's going on in the United States, hardcore's kind of taking over. Over in the UK, the scene's kind of a giant mess. So the Sex Pistols break up. After the Sex Pistols break up, Johnny Rotten says, you know what, fuck punk, all you fake poser bands, all you alternative television, fuck you. The adverts, fuck you. Adam and the Ant, get the fuck out of my face. So he's like, you know what, punk is a dying branch. Punk is, I don't want to do the Johnny Rotten impersonation.
Yeah, no,
he's like, you know what, I'm going to start Public Image Limited, which became one of the first post-punk bands, which was like, yeah, we're going to take inspirations from punk, but we're also taking inspirations from funk, from reggae, from disco, from pop music, as well as punk music. And so you get this eclectic sound of like upbeat tones with like the radical political edge of punk rock.
Yeah.
So, you know, that starts to become a thing. You also get, I mean, there's still traditional bands out there. You know, Stiff Little Fingers, one of my favorite punk bands of all time from Ireland. They were proto-pop punk. They were very much anti-UK. I wonder why. You also get the Skids from Scotland. You get the Slits, which was an all-female post-punk band. Shout out. They're awesome. The Ruts, who were sort of mixed in with the oi punk people, but they were sort of more post-punk. They were doing their own thing too. And then you sort of get like a few things here and there, but this is when like post-punk becomes sort of the UK answer to hardcore. While everybody in the United States is punching each other in the face, you have bands like Joy Division who are coming out and are sort of like proto-emo.
Yeah, I was going to say arguably the first emo band.
Yeah, but they very much start goth rock.
Yeah.
They are very much prominently like the founders of goth punk. Them and Suji and the Banshees and The Cure are sort of the big three in that branch, where they're very much like, yeah, why do we have to punch each other? Let's just like talk about our feelings, talk about our emotions. Joy Division, one of the best bands out there. Unfortunately, Ian Curtis was suffering through a lot of shit. The poor guy had epilepsy back when we didn't even have like medication to deal with it. So he was just like, what the fuck is wrong with me? And the disease was ruining his life. And he ended up taking his own life, which is heartbreaking. And you can hear a lot of that pain and anguish he had in a lot of his lyrics. A lot of his lyrics. Unknown Pleasures is loaded with that depressing shit. But you also get, not everything in post-punk is like all sad and like emotional, like punch to the core. You also get Gang of Four, which were like, they were mixing punk with funk elements. And you were getting Entertainment, which is Gang of Four's first album, which was a really fantastic album, really kicked ass, really great thing. You also get Wired. They were an art punk noise rock outfit. Devo's becoming a thing. Magazine, a short-lived band, but they inspired a bunch of other post-punk bands out there. And then the Talking Heads. The Talking Heads. Do I need to go into the Talking Heads? They're prominently one of the best bands of all time. Public Image Limited I talked about. And then, Susie's and the Banshees, The Cure, goth punk is becoming a thing.
This is when I think like punk rock starts to look inward. Into, it's funny. It's like a nice arc to the story of punk rock. So like really just be about all like outside, like look at what the outside world is doing to me.
Thatcher, fuck Thatcher, fuck Thatcher, which is going to be very prominent in this scene soon. But it's like, fuck Thatcher. And then a lot of these post-punk bands are like, how do I feel about Thatcher? What do I feel about poverty? What do I feel? You know, and then you also get like bands like Bauhaus, who are very much pioneers of goth rock.
Yeah.
Some of the best goth rock you're gonna find out there. Like the stereotype of like the black makeup, and Bela Lugosi's "Dead" is a fantastic track.
Yeah.
I need to mention Bauhaus because I was about to go through the goth section without mentioning Bauhaus. So I have to bring them up, and I have to bring up Killing Joke, who are also pretty good too. So there's that. Anarcho-punk is also a thing.
Yeah, it's a classic anarchy sign you see drawn on everything, everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
By any 13-year-old who doesn't understand anything about government.
The world. I mean, yeah, naturally
Or the world,
speaking.
yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing is that a lot of the, you say that, but a lot of the anarcho-punk bands at the time when this started, these were some smart motherfuckers.
Oh yeah, yeah.
These were the guys that were like, yeah, I read Nietzsche every day, and I drink strictly like strychnine. That's all I consume. So like these guys, and they're very much they're taking like the nihilistic fuck Thatcher thing, and they're saying no, fuck the whole system, fuck the entire thing, and they take sort of the centrist, we're not going to take any sides of punk, and they shove it all the way to the left, where it's like they're not even like distancing themselves from anything else. Most prominent band out of this is Crass. You've seen the logo to Crass. It's like the cross with the swastika with like the X circle thing.
I don't know that I've seen that.
I don't want to pull it up.
Yeah,
but it's sort of it's a known logo, but they were very much also the pioneers of crust punk, which is arguably one of the worst forms of punk rock, where it was sort of it's the punk equivalent to black metal, where it's lo-fi as shit. No one knows how to play their instruments. Everything's recorded to hell. It's rough, but you know. It's also like very dark, pessimistic. Social issues are very much the prominent form. Discharge is a big proponent in crust punk, and they're also anarcho punks, and they're also hardcore. Hardcore now enters UK. Thank you very much, Discharge. But you also get Anti-Sect. You get Crass. Crass is the prominent name. And on the other aspect, from anarcho punk, we get oi punk. Now we get to talk about skinheads. So, while the Sex Pistols are becoming a thing, this thing called pub punk starts to become a thing, where it's like bands that are sort of being able to sing in bars. You get Sham 69 is sort of the prominent face of this. There's a bunch of other bands like the Adverts, the Business, and they're very much the British equivalent to hardcore. They're fast tempo, they're social, they talk about political shit all the time. And this seems to, unfortunately, attract a lot of the working class skinhead types who end up co-opting the oi punk fame and the oi punk image to make a very hateful, offensive, racist, shitty version of punk rock. And then oi punk gets this black stain for ages of being skinhead punk. Yeah. Which is unfortunate because, like, the early bands were all right. Like, there's the Business, Cockney Rejects, Sham 69, the Adverts, who their whole the Addicts. The Addicts, that's their name. Not the Adverts. The Adverts is a different band, but they, I think, are also oi punk. Anyway, the Addicts, who their whole gimmick was like they really liked the Clockwork Orange. So they showed up in like the white suits with the penny hats, and their lead singer wore like a fucking mime makeup. Yeah. They were sick. But there was a lot of those bands, and then unfortunately Skinheads came out and just took it over and ruined it for everyone.
Which is funny, like, so like when I got into like punk in the way that I did, which is really just pop punk, because it was like late 90s, there was like a lot of, you would see like patches that would be like anti-racism and like skinheads with the X through it, and like I remember thinking like, are people really like worried about like all these like, issues still? Like,
there is a reason why Dead Kennedys wrote Nazi punks fuck off.
Yeah,
there is a reason. There is a reason, and the reason was because of Britain. Thanks, Britain. And then of course there's like this subsection called street punk, which is what really is the equivalent to hardcore after oi punk became skinhead punk. Street punk became like, this is where you get the guys with the giant fucking hair with the spikes, the neon green shit. Most prominent bands from there, GBH, The Exploited, are probably the big name that everybody knows. UK 82 is sort of the name of it, because they become like the second wave, like the third wave of UK punk.
Right.
And they're just all like guttural, like, fuck you, we fucking hate this, we're on poverty, eat my dick, fuck you. And it's the most abrasive, annoying shit in the world. I love it, but it's the most abrasive, annoying shit in the world. I think the most known band, at least in the United States, there's only one American band, that would be the Casualties, if you know the Casualties. They sort of were like a Warped Tour fucking old-timey band. The guys with like giant fucking spikes in their head from New York. And then the other last one before we just go on to the rest of life is ska.
Yes.
We begin the tale of ska here, because a lot of these now bands, thanks to the punk rock revival and post-punk in particular, they start to come out and take different influences. One of the influences is reggae.
Yeah.
And this is where you get the Special. The Special come into play, and they build what is now known as two-tone. Two-tone gets adopted into punk rock, and this is where you get bands like The Special, Madness. There's a bunch of others, but those are the prominent two.
I feel like Operation IVs.
We'll get to them later.
I thought that was more this era.
They are very much two-tone, but they're
Later.
like 89. They're 89. These guys are like 79, 80, 81. So these are like around this era, but they're very much like Ghost Town from The Special, very much politically charged. But like Madness is just more silly. A lot of the ska in this time is just silly, happy music.
Yeah.
Because all the other punk genres are like, fucking Thatcher. But like,
and there's people who are like, I don't really care that much.
dude, chill out, man. Why you gotta be such a bummer,
Can
man?
we just pogo?
I just want to pogo, bro.
Yeah, and like I feel like ska was also like kids who were in band, but also like wanted a little bit of respect. You know? Like, yeah, I can play the trombone, but like I'm kind of a badass also.
I'm kind of cool. I smoke cigarettes. My mom doesn't know about it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Which I'm not making fun of ska. Streetlight Manifesto is still one of my favorite bands ever, but they're way after this point. So
we're gonna get to those guys. We're gonna get to them and Jeff Rosenstock and the boys. But around this time, by the turn of the 80s, punk becomes mainstream, as I've gone over like 5,000 times. A bunch of bands here. And then UK is also getting picked out, too. You get Billy Idol from Generation X now becoming Billy Idol.
Yeah.
Monet himself. And also the other big name was Elvis Costello.
Yep.
Who becomes sort of like this new wave front man he's like punk because he has like the fast energy, but he's taking a lot of influences from like Buddy Holly and like 50s rock, and he's sort of like making it so showy. A fun thing about Elvis Costello, I didn't know this, he got permanently banned for 12 years from SNL. Just like Fear, because he was on there. He was supposed to perform this one song about like British royals in like the turn of the century, and they're playing it, and he's like, "Guys, no, wait, stop!" Like live during the broadcast, he's like, "Stop! Sorry, folks." There's no reason to play this here. Fuck this. 1, 2, 3, 4, and he plays Radio, probably the most known Elvis Costello song. You know, radio is a salvation. Also, a song about censorship and about corporate censorship, which is something that MSNBC didn't want him to play. So apparently, the executives and Lorne Michael hated him and banned him for 12 years because of it. So Elvis Costello, whoever says he's not punk, just show him that performance. It's very punk. So you get that. And then a lot of other bands get picked up, but also to start getting founded on this new upbeat noise. So you get bands like The Jam, who are more mods than punks, but they end up sort of co-opting the punk sound. You know, you get the Buzzcocks who get up, the B-52s, who are very prominently like new wave, the Police, and the Pretenders. You get a lot of bands that are coming out, and new wave becomes a thing mainly because executives are picking up all these bands, but they don't want to call them punk. Because at the time of the turn of the century,
I can't even think of the word, but it's got dirt on it. The name
Yeah.
punk has dirt on it.
It has dirt on it because when you say punk, they think at best Johnny Rotten saying fuck all of you and fuck Thatcher. At worst, because it's now the 80s, they're thinking of the Dead Kennedys and Black Flag and all those scary guys that are punching each other in LA. So they just want to so they make new wave into a thing.
This is when commercialism comes in big time.
Yeah.
Like people realize that kids will buy these albums, and that's exactly where we want to get our money.
Exactly.
So how can we get our money and save face?
Yeah, so we'll take this as a thing. And what ends up happening is that new wave ends up becoming like this overarching branch of like a bunch of subgenres, like synth punk, synth pop, power pop, goth, post punk, and ska all become new wave.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this means that you get Blondie and the Clash, or the Blondie and the Talking Heads being fucking put next to George goddamn Michael. But, I digress. So now everybody's like, fuck this, fuck new wave, whatever. Hardcore is becoming a thing. And now it's sort of splintering off into a bunch of other stuff. Because now hardcore is splintering from like hardcore to horrorcore and hardcore to rockabilly. Hardcore to skate punk.
Yeah.
And skate punk's important because all these bands end up inspiring the Green Days and the Offsprings of the world. So you get bands like Agent Orange, D.I., The Faction, which is an awesome band. They have a song called Skate and Destroy, which is probably their biggest hit. It's a pretty tight jam. Big Boys, JFA, Suicidal Tendencies. The most known band out of this is probably either NoFX or Bad Religion.
Yeah.
Either of those two, they become sort of like the face of skate punk. And a lot of this is like, they kind of coin it as pop hardcore because it's like upbeat, it's still fast, it's still intense, it's still adrenaline pumping, but it's happier in tone, happier in rhythm, nicer. Everybody's having a good time with this.
It becomes a little produced.
Yeah, a little nice, a little smoother on the ears.
I feel like this is the generation when the independent label starts to get help from major labels.
Yeah, this is where you start to get, like, for Bad Religion, you get Epitaph Records coming out. They start coming in, they start boosting up their things. SST, I think, gets picked up by another label, too.
And what's it? Fat Cat Records?
Fat Cat, Fat Wreck.
Fat Wreck, yeah.
A bunch of these people coming out. And also, by the time like the late 80s into the 90s roll around, you start to get what's now called college rock, which is you take a lot of the punk energy and a lot of the punk bands, so like your Bad Religions, your Descendants, your Minutemen, your Husker Du's, and then you're throwing on like the Replacements, who are they're
they have
sort
a great song called Tim.
You get the Replacements, who are like, they're punk, but they're more like alt rock than they are punk rock. You get bands like REM coming out of this scene. And then you get and all these bands still are influenced by hardcore bands. They're still influenced by the LA bands. They're still getting influenced by that, but they're also like a little bit lighter. For instance, REM, very much inspired by the Smiths, who are huge over in the UK right now as post-punk band.
Yeah.
So this starts to develop, and then this sound ends up inspiring what we now know as grunge.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these bands, and specifically a lot of like the underground bands that inspired a lot of those bands, like Flipper, a lot of like the Sonic Youths, a lot of these other bands start to become big in the Seattle scene. And you get Kurt Cobain really loving the Butthole Surfers and Flipper and the Zero Boys and all this stuff. And he starts loving that shit. And so that starts to inspire a lot more of that sound that we will eventually get to. I have a paragraph about. In New York, I would be amiss to not mention this fucking Satan psychopath on this, but a little man named Gigi Allen shows up.
Yes.
he kind of becomes the face of New York punk outside of like the New York hardcore guys, like the Youth Crew guys and the Straight Edge guys and Agnostic Front. You get Gigi Allen, who is a psychopath.
Yep.
Who gets naked on stage and shits in his hand and throws it at people. And
I always feel like Gigi Allen is the logical conclusion to the beginning of punk rock.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like when Gigi Allen died of a heroin overdose and there's the picture of him, the girl taking the picture with him, I feel like that was like the death of what punk rock originated as. The very much like, fuck you, I'm here to offend you. And that is all, like, my existence is to make your existence a little bit more like the pain I feel. And I feel like he's just such a polarizing figure. I do not like anything that Gigi Allen has ever put out. I really don't. I don't find it enjoyable.
Bite It, You Scum's a track. I like it. It exists. And I think, and to be fair too, when he shows up on these talk shows like fucking Geraldo and like, you know, Morton Downey Jr., it's some of the greatest television of all time.
I have not seen it in any of that.
It is hilarious.
Yeah.
It is some of the best stuff because you just have, I think the last one he did, there was this, I forget the show. This woman's like, we had Gigi Allen on. A week later after this interview, he ended up dying in his hotel. Here is the clip of what happened. And he's just on stage yelling at them, being like, I am a savior to your children. I will fuck your children. I will eat your children alive. I will murder them in front of you to save rock and roll. I am the soul of rock and roll. It's just nuts. And he brings out like two women to his side piece who are just like, oh, I mean, fucking, you know, I suck his dick occasionally, but he's my daddy and I love him and all this. He's nuts. But like, you're absolutely right. He is sort of the logical conclusion to the Iggy Pop, you know, aesthetic and the Sid Vicious wearing a swastika on his chest. He's the logical conclusion, is this nihilistic, literally fuck everyone. I am going to destroy everything in my sight, and none of you are going to do anything about it. And very polarizing because, you know, as much as I love Bite It, You Scum, and as much as I think that his television appearances are hysterical, he was an objectively piece of shit. He's just a piece of shit. And, you know, you can praise him all you want, but like, you know, when you bring women on stage and rape them on stage, you're a piece of shit. You're a piece of shit. So like, fuck him.
And another reason that, you know, commercial viability wants to get away from the term punk rock.
Exactly. It's alienating, and it's like, oh, this is punk? This guy shitting in a hand and punching women? Oh, cool. Fuck this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he ends up becoming a name. And also, too, out of the hardcore scene, what ends up happening is, I just need to take this off because my hair is just getting exposed at this point. What ends up happening is that out of Black Flag, out of the Circle Jerks, out of the Dead Kennedys, you get a lot of these jocks, and they call them jock punks, who are these guys who show up and they just want to beat people up. Like the punk scene, as violent as it was a family.
Yeah.
People are showing up and they're having a good time and they're enjoying life. And here comes these guys who heard about this fast, intense music, and all they want to do is, I'm just going to beat the shit out of these nerds. Let me beat the shit out of these nerds. And people were not liking it. And ostensibly, it just became a sausage fest filled with punk bands talking about how much they hate women, how much they're not getting laid, how much they hate other people. And out of this comes a little genre called Riot Girl, which is hardcore, but it's feminist. A lot of these female-led bands coming out of the West Coast, most prominently Bikini Kills, who were basically saying, you know what, fuck you guys, you misogynist shitheads. I get to do this now, fuck you.
Yeah.
And they give a lot of that hardcore energy with a feminist twist, which is really cool. It doesn't really get like mainstream, but it does inspire a bunch of bands. For instance, Hole, L7, a lot of the female-led bands of the 90s have a lot to go to Riot Girl for like a punch-up. Be like, yo, thank you very much. And unfortunately, a lot of those bands get labeled Riot Girl and they hate it. For instance, Courtney Love is not a fan of the term Riot Girl. But, you know.
But see, that's the thing about punk rock. I feel like every inch of space in punk rock needed to be fought for.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, that's much respect to Riot Girl. Much respect to
Queer core.
Yeah.
Another thing, hardcore that's all LGBT friendly. Hell yeah, let's go.
Yeah, but you know, it's funny, like a lot of that was just into response to, you know, like the racism and I can't think of
the early age of that nihilist, fuck you, centrist, let me offend whoever we want in punk later turned into unironic racism, unironic sexism, unironic homophobia. Yeah. Like, I love hardcore to death. I love the Circle Jerks. I love all that stuff. I love Fear. Half of those songs have something to do with like, yeah, fuck queers, fuck the gays, they're shit. It's like, come on, like, come on, guys. Like, I'm happy enough to say I think Black Flag avoided being a gigantic piece of shit, but there was a lot of bands, specifically Fear, I can point out. I think the Germs too, that were just like, we just hate the gays, and it's like, why? So, like, the fact that you, like, go this, or We Hate Women, for instance, with Fear, Their Mouth Won't Shut, the opening track to their second album, More Beer, is about punching their girlfriend because they won't shut up. Really offensive shit. So I think a lot of, like, the offensive, nihilistic, shithead nature of early punk, and it all culminates with Gigi Allen, you get, by the 90s, people being like, nah, fuck this. Nah, fuck this. And once we get to post-hardcore, you get a lot of people being like, nah, fuck this.
Yeah.
We can do this without you guys. Fuck you.
Yeah.
And so you get this energy, and you get the energy of grunge coming out now in the Seattle scene, which, by the way, apparently all the grunge bands hated the term grunge. They would rather be called the Seattle scene because they're like, grunge is a fucking label that's made by, like, a suit. Fuck this.
Yeah.
But this is where you get Nirvana, this is where you get the Melvins, this is where you get Soundgarden and Pearl Jam. And what they did was they took the fast nature of hardcore punk, they took the fast and, like, abrasive nature of punk rock, and they melded it with the chord structure and the riffs of heavy metal. Mm-hmm. And they melded it into this weird cacophony of, like, the most intense raw sound anyone has heard.
Yeah.
And arguably the first proto-grunge band was Black Flag. Because what ends up happening is Black Flag releases Damage, which is a hardcore punk staple. They then release My War. First half of My War, still hardcore punk. The second half of My War is literally just a it's an awful bad Black Sabbath. That's what I'm thinking. A bad Black Sabbath impersonation. And people are like, what the fuck is this shit? But the Seattle scene's like, what the fuck is this shit? What the fuck is this? And so you get guys like fucking Buzz Osborne going to Black Flag shows and saying, man, that's super cool. And he ends up making riffs that sound like that. And he ends up making the Melvins, who are awesome. And you get guys like fucking, where the fuck? I had it here somewhere. It's melded in my notes. But the guitarist or the bassist for Nirvana.
Kurt Novoselic.
Yeah, Kurt Novoselic or whoever the hell his name is. Kurt's Novoselic. Kurt's Novoselic. There we go. I have it written down.
That's close.
Yeah, you know, it's close enough. He said that was the biggest life experience he had in his sound and his creation. And so you get this sludgy, dark, nihilistic. And this also, too, it takes a lot of stuff from post-punk because instead of being like, fuck all of you and saying like an outward approach to life, they're talking about what they feel inside. And unfortunately in Seattle, a lot of the people that were feeling inside were feeling very depressed, very sad, very upset.
I wonder if the rain had anything to do with it.
I think maybe. I don't know. It could be rain, it could be heroin. One of the two.
Also just like so that's like early 90s, right?
That was like the Seattle scene was like 88, 89, and then it became big in the 90s.
Big in the 90s, all right.
So like these guys end up becoming like huge. Green River is arguably considered the first grunge band who they release an album that gets coined grunge or gets coined an opt grunge. But you also get Soundgarden, you get Pearl Jam, you get Alice in Chains. Those become the big names. And then Nirvana. Do I need to talk about fucking Nirvana? I looked at, trust me, I saw the Wikipedia page for Nirvana. I do not want to talk about Nirvana that much, but very influential, and they're the reason why a lot of these bands now in the 90s end up having a fucking chance to become mainstream.
Yeah. Yep.
This is where you get the pop punk explosion and the mainstream success of it all, because now you have a lot of the Bay Area punk bands, so like Operation Ivy, for instance. Operation Ivy from the Bay Area, which was the band of Tim Armstrong, who would later go and make Rancid, which they kind of were ska punk. They were third wave ska, I believe. They're considered third wave ska. And they very much took like the aspects of like skate punk and fused it with ska because it was all upbeat, but it was still fast tempo and and it gets you maybe a little bit of Youth Crew because there's some group chords in there. There's some group chants. It's some good stuff. I love Energy. Energy's like probably top 10 favorite albums of mine. But you get that. You get Jawbreaker coming out, who are sort of considered one of the first post-hardcore bands to become mainstream because like you had Husker Du and you had Minutemen, but now you're getting into okay, we're getting the explosion thanks to Nirvana. We get to come out, and then Jawbreaker will later become big when emo becomes a thing. Sublime, another band, seminal. The Offspring, and Green Day. Green Day gets this major explosion thanks to Nirvana, and they release Dookie in '94. Dookie goes platinum. Yeah. Uber platinum.
Dookie is probably the most popular first album of anyone in my age range. I feel like Dookie was the first we can convince our parents to buy it.
Yeah.
And like it was not my first album. I think it was my second album. My first album was a Weird Al.
Hell yeah.
Which maybe that's why I have odd sensibility. But but yeah, Dookie's like my first introduction to what punk was at all.
Yeah.
And I feel like anyone in my age range, like 35, that was also our first, because it was the first thing we heard. Like I grew up in the MTV era.
Yeah.
And like I feel like MTV was like, ooh, these guys are silly little stoners. We can and they do like they have poppy riffs. We can get the kids hooked on this.
Longview is such a nice track. What's it about? Masturbation.
Yeah. There's no way they'll look any deeper into punk rock. Let's start them here.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes bubblegum, and Dookie becomes huge. Then right after that, you get Smash, which becomes 7 times gold. It's considered a huge boost to pop punk.
Yeah.
Even though a lot of people in punk really hate The Offspring, I don't know why they hate them. I love The Offspring. Sorry, I really played Crazy Taxi like a motherfucker. I'm sorry,
Yep.
But you get that, and then you get Blink 182, who comes out of this scene, who start off as skate punk. They're sort of in that skate punk crew, and then they later become mainstream thanks to Enema of the State.
Yep.
So you get all of this coming into play.
Even Dude Ranch, I feel, that was pushed.
Yeah, it's a little bit. Yeah, you get, well, I forget, Dude Ranch has Damn It on it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because I know it has Josie, which is probably my favorite Blink 182 song. That sounds fun.
I always explain that album as you ever eat Skittles and smoke a cigarette at the same time. It's pretty much like what it's like. Yeah, I have like a little bit of an attitude, but I'm still like sweet as sugar.
Exactly. That's fine. It's good. But yeah, so pop punk becomes a thing, and then of course Pennywise follows them after that. Yeah. And out of all this, we get to what would probably inspire, this is going to be probably the longest segment, what inspired the sound of the 2000s. Mm-hmm. So we're going a little bit back to the 80s. I do apologize. We were almost out. We were almost there. We were almost there. We got to go back. I'm sorry. But this is where post-hardcore becomes a thing. Because now, after hardcore has kind of attracted all these dickheads who are punching each other in the face and shit, a lot of these bands are like, okay, let me evolve the style.
Yeah.
And you were also getting that anyway with Husker Du, and you were getting that with the Minutemen, who were experimenting with tones and sounds, and they were trying to experiment with like how to express themselves. So they were taking the aggression of hardcore, but then they were taking the lyrical styles of post-punk, where it's very much like my feelings, my internal feelings.
Yeah.
And they were sort of expelling out. And a lot of it's known for like these whispered croons and these like really like whiny vocals. This is where whiny vocals becomes a giant criticism. But you get bands like Naked Ray Gun, who were a post-punk band that took hardcore elements and developed it. They're pretty cool. You get Effigy. You get a lot of bands that are inspired by Sonic Youth.
Yeah.
And only Sonic Youth, no other band from No Wave, just Sonic Youth. Fuck Lydia Lunch. You get that. You get Big Black, who are kind of more industrial rock, but they're also a prominent aspect of this genre. They inspire a lot of this. Black Flag, of course, Husker Du, Minutemen. And then this sort of worms its way to Washington. Washington is still doing the straight edge hardcore thing. They're still being like, don't smoke, don't drink, be yourself. But Washington is now evolving into taking that sound of like emotional hardcore, and they are building upon it. This is where you get Rites of Spring, who become sort of the first emo band.
Yeah.
Ostensibly. Rites of Spring, post-punk legends, emo pioneers, their self-titled album. You probably have seen the image. It's the weird painted horse thing, black and white, looks like a nightmare fuel thing, but it's great. Get the Dang Nasties, you get Gray Matter, you get Embrace, you get a lot of these bands, most of them from Discord Records, owned by Ian MacKaye of Minor Threat, and this is what they call the Revolution of Summer. These are sort of these bands that end up building this scene that's like, yeah, we're as intense as hardcore, but we have more thought-provoking lyrics. We're sort of more focused on like the internal feelings of ourselves. A lot of them bordering on communist because they have a lot of really left-leaning lyrics, specifically bands like Nations of Ulysses, who we can get to. But the Revolution of Summer ends up becoming this concert show that ends up building like the building blocks of post-hardcore and emo. They end up building around this emotional sound, which ends up inspiring a bunch of other bands like Jawbox, who make some pretty good songs, I guess. Nation of Ulysses, who Refused basically rips off. And then the biggest name is Fugazi. Yeah. The biggest name in post-hardcore is Fugazi.
Repeater.
Oh, boy. Repeater, baby. I love 13 songs, personally. Waiting Room is such a jam. But it's fronted by Ian MacKaye and Guy Picciotto of Rites of Spring. So Ian MacKaye, Minor Threat, Rites of Spring, the two frontmen, the two leading names of DC hardcore, melding into one band. And their idea of it was to make music that departed from hardcore. This is where you get the anti-mosh movement, whereas like, we want to make music that makes you think. We want you to feel. Please don't punch each other. We're anti-violence. If you punch each other, we'll refund you. And they start to really take on the DIY aesthetic.
Yep.
Ian MacKaye, I haven't really bring him up much, but I really do admire Ian MacKaye because he's sort of like the forerunner of like DIY and punk culture. He starts Discord Records. He ends up marketing all these bands. He ends up paying for all these bands. He ends up touring with all these bands. He finds out which bands are coming in from the areas like DOA from Canada or Black Flag, or there's actually a mini documentary that I found online called Another State of Mind, which is about Social Distortion Youth Brigade touring the hardcore circuit, which ended up becoming a thing because all these bands are like traveling. They're going from California to like the border of Canada to like Chicago down over. Yeah. And they end up in Washington, D.C., and Ian MacKaye's like booking them homes and leading them to where they could go.
Oh, my dog is saying hello.
Oh no. Hello, dog. I can't see you, but I hope you're a good pupper.
Yeah.
And then they also do this other thing too, which is something that really hasn't been a thing in punk, like mainstream wise, but they sort of create the idea of a lead and a rhythm section,
All right.
ostensibly. So what happens is that they start playing initially, and Ian MacKay's the guitarist, and Guy Picciotto is the lead singer. He starts to realize that Ian's tones are really low, so he's hitting that underground rhythm section so that he can play guitar and he can just soar and make the fucking loud shit. So these guys start pairing.
Which is an adaptation of just regular rock music.
Exactly.
You know, there's always been a rhythm and lead, you know, and it's really, I think this era of punk rock this is kind of where punk is not the main influence of the music anymore.
Yeah.
I feel like this is where, you know, like rock and roll really digs its heat. Like people are more about the musicality than the just fast rhythm, abrasive. It's more now like, let's make music.
Exactly. Let's work something out. These guys take a lot of influences from reggae and funk.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that noise. It's not just, oh, I really like the Black Flag. Let me just make a Black Flag clone. No, it's like, yeah, I like Black Flag, but I also like George Clinton. Can we, let's do that. Let's make it happen. Oh, sure. Why not? And what really makes it super cool is that they tried their best to make their music as accessible to the masses as humanly possible. They would play a ton of shows. They would record a ton of those shows. After they broke up on their own website, they released all their live shows, and they charged people like on a pay what you want basis.
Yeah.
When they started doing concerts, they would charge people the barest of minimum prices because they want the most amount of people to come and watch their stuff.
Yeah.
So they're like, yeah, $5.
Yeah.
Like, you just pay $5, come on in. Which back in that day, it's like $10 now, or like 15 now. But
this is the start of the merch movement.
Yeah.
This is the start like, hey, if you want to support us, this is how you support us. Not, hey, buy our record, you know, we're going to charge you $30 to see us live. You know, this is the start of, you have the choice of whether or not you support us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not like you're going to support us.
We give you options.
Yeah.
If you can't see us this way, well, you can see us that way. And they very much make it so like, oh, you have like $3 to your name. Oh, it's fine. Just come on in.
Yeah.
Enjoy it. It's fine. It's cool. And it's really this like powerful movement. It inspires so many people. Insane amount of people are inspired by Fugazi. And that noise ends up developing into emo. A lot of these bands that come out afterwards, you get guys like At the Drive-In, Drive Like Jehu. You get the Jesus Lizards. You get the Rollins Band, Henry Rollins of Black Flag coming in and being like, I have feelings too, guys.
And you know what? My joints hurt. Turns out you can't just fucking be a menace on stage for 100 years.
Now
you get old.
Menace. Now he's a philosophical menace.
Yeah.
He's like,
my testosterone is drying up, and I would like to sing about it still.
Instead of shouting about like degenerate cops in LA, he's shouting about, why don't you love yourself?
Yeah.
Love yourself. But you get him, you get Cap and Jazz, who become like one of the pioneers of emo. Yeah. You get Cap and Jazz, you get Refused, who end up shaping the noise of modern music with the shape of punk to come in like 98. This is where you get sort of like elements of screamo, elements of emo music, elements of electronica, elements of like just 500 different genres in this one album. And it's just wild you get this stuff. But you get that, and it's now building upon that because now people are hearing the DC sound and they're getting inspired to make their stuff. And this is where the DC sound ends up in the Midwest. And this is where you get Midwest emo, folks. We're getting there. Yep. You get Sunny Day Real Estate. The boys themselves with
Saddlebrook Records. Well, that's a little bit later, but
And
Definitely inspired by Sunny Day Real Estate.
exactly, that you get their seminal work Diary, which becomes a major hit, or at least like an indie hit. Jawbreaker releases 24-Hour Revenge Therapy,
Yep.
which also becomes like sort of the archetypal emo record. And both of those bands end up spinning out and building that Midwest emo sound, which you get a lot of bands like The Promise Ring, the Get Up Kids, Jimmy Eats World.
Yeah.
You get a lot of these bands coming out.
This is where I started out as like a hardcore head, but I really just because my friends were. So I was like, oh yeah, All Out War is great. I love fucking moshing and
punching people in the face. It's so cool, man.
But then I was like, you know what? I really don't.
I like my feelings.
Yeah, I'm kind of sad a little bit. I'm not angry. Yeah, but this is where I start to get into like DIY type things, like underground. At that point in my life, it was being called, underground punk.
Yeah, which is sort of this fusion of like mostly like post-hardcore emo punk. A lot of this like just get in touch with your feelings.
Yeah,
don't
where it wasn't pop punk, which is the Blink-182, Green Day.
Cool kids pretending to be the slacker. Well, there's the slacker guys, and that's why they're the cool kids.
Yeah.
It's basically, they're the slackers being the cool kids, and these are the slackers who are just crippled and sad. And so you get these guys, you get Weezer coming into the fray, which I didn't even realize were apparently emo at first, as opposed to rock.
I mean, like Pinkerton, like that's a solid emo album. I would make the argument.
I hate Pinkerton.
Yeah, it's not a good album.
It's a seminal,
terrible.
It's a seminal emo record. I'll agree with you
yeah.
on that. It inspires a bunch of other bands beyond that point. It's fucking incel rock, but it's a good track. And then you get also the inspiration, because a lot of bands like Nation of Ulysses and a lot of those bands, they're also dabbling in what would eventually become math rock.
Yeah,
which you
mentioned At the Drive-In, which
is
I mean, get more math rock. I don't think you can. Beautiful, love the band, but intense in their
complexity.
Yes,
yeah,
there we go.
Intense in their complexity. You get to that thing where it's like, my friends who are humongous music heads, they all hate like. I meme my friend a lot because he's like, I just can't dig a song that's in 4/4, and I'm like, so you hate 92% of the music that's out there right now? And he's like, yeah, I just want to listen to like something that's like, I need like 8/16 signature, right? And I'm like, or 8/9, and I'm like, fucking dude, come on. And so, but you get that, and this comes into play with American football, who kind of become like the face of Midwest emo, and they're kind of a meme now because so many people are like, oh, that's boomer emo, and incels will say it's the greatest album of all time, which is upsetting because it's a really good album. But and then out of that scene, the Midwest sound ends up going back to the East Coast, and now you get New Jersey and Long Beach getting involved in emo, because now you're getting this band Lifeline, who sort of become the founders of what they claim to be New Jersey. I think you said underground punk.
Yeah, kind of like emo before it was emo, before there was like I can't even think of like Finch, and before Drive Through Records, pretty much.
Yeah.
Before that, it was just considered underground to us. Like it was kind of pop punky. It was kind of not rock. It was just this something. Before it had the name emo, it was just like, I don't know what this is, but I like it. So it's underground punk.
For real. And it inspires a lot of these bands that come out. You get like Senses Fail comes out of this scene, Save the Day comes out of this scene, Thursday comes out of this scene, Taking Back Sunday, those pedophile pieces of shit and Brand New, they come out of this scene, and the most prominent name, MCR, My Chemical Romance, comes out of this scene, and
straight out of Newark,
and not only comes out of this scene, but basically sort of glams glamifies emo, because
Yeah.
now it goes from like a bunch of sad college kids talking about how they got dumped to now we're gonna wear the eyeliner, we're gonna have the emo haircut,
we're gonna make our shows a production.
Exactly.
And a lot of this too, like as a lot of those bands are like tightly knitted together. Although like Taking Back Sunday, brand new, their feud or whatever, but like that was like there was considered like a writing community that was around that time, like the Long Island punk rock. At that point, like people wanted to call them hardcore because they screamed. Like so, like they're considered Long Island hardcore scene. But like I never considered that hardcore because like I had seen bands like Earth Crisis.
Yeah.
Like I was like, this isn't hardcore at all.
A name I didn't bring up, but they're also like they're known for like pro-environmentalism on top of being straight edge. And I think also, I might be wrong here, but they also probably advocated veganism. That was the start of
I just liked how fucking hard they were. They're a hard ass band.
Fuck yeah, bro.
But
it's that New York hardcore, baby.
Yeah, but like that kind of came out around that, and like I can remember like taking shit for like going to Taking Back Sunday shows.
Hey, there you go.
But like, because like I grew up around hardcore kids who like why did I almost say Coheed and Cambria? That's not what I really wanted to say.
You were in the Bowery listening to Sick of It All, being like, why are you going to Taking Back Sunday shows, you fucking goon?
Yeah, like Candiria and God Forbid and By the Grace of. That's where like that's to me, this is where hardcore splits from punk too.
Yeah,
hardcore then becomes more metal.
Yeah, you get a lot of the metalcore bands coming out of this, which later inspires the current crop of hardcore punk now, or hardcore. Now it's not even punk, not even hardcore punk's a thing. Hardcore punk was like, oh, that's grandpa music. Hardcore is now a movement, and it's a lifestyle, and it's a thing, and there's different branches. You could either be a straight edge kid, you could either be an environmentalist, you could be that, or you could just listen to Knock Loose and want to punch people in the face. So, you get all that. And then, of course, we mentioned Pinkerton. I hate Pinkerton, but it did inspire a bunch of emo bands.
But there's like one good song on it.
Like, I mean, I'm a Blue album advocate. I think that's probably their best album. But like, you always see like pitchfork goons being like, "Yeah, Pinkerton's a great album." And it's like, yeah, we get it because you live in Soho and you got rejected by feminists all day. You fucking incel. You get it, but like. It's cool, but they're considered the most important band of the last 10 years because Pinkerton ended up inspiring a bunch of other bands that would later take over the airwaves in the 2000s, which would include, and not limited to, some of the prominent names: Fall Out Boy, Paramore, Panic at the Disco, MCR. I could go on and talk about the fucking Used and the Maine and Hawthorne Heights and all the other bands, but God forbid, I don't want to. So at this point in time, this is when Warped becomes a thing. Warped Tour, Vans Warped Tour, was sort of started as like an alt-rock festival, very similar to like Coachella, but then they're like, you know what, let's just focus on punk music. We're going to get punk bands in. And this is where they're bringing in like old head bands with new school bands. And this is where the explosion of emo kind of takes place. Because you get like, you get like each person has their own like little piece of things. You got the Midwest guys, you got the DC crew, you got New Jersey, you got all them, and they're like making their pockets. But Warp gave them a voice. They came around and were like, we can put you on these shows and put you on this label.
And also connected then them to bands like Exploited. Like they had, because there was 8 stages, and like, so you had to watch somebody at some point that you didn't know.
Exactly.
And like, you can't just sit at the drive-through record stage the whole time, because at one point the early November is going to come on and you're going to fall asleep. So you have to go to another stage to check somebody out. And I love the early November, but But like, I feel like there though, that's when I got exposed to the different types of punk rock, as far as thrash punk or horror punk. Seeing, I can't remember any of the Warp Tours that I went to. Thank you, Xanax. But it's I remember leaving there with pockets full of stickers of bands that I checked out later.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
My biggest one of the many big regrets I have being a youngling is that all my friends in middle school and high school, they were all fucking Warped Tour kids. So all the same people, like I was friends with all the emo kids, like all these kids that were wearing like the teased hair and they loved MCR. They thought MCR was the greatest band of all time. They would always go to Warped Tour every year.
Yeah.
They would drive down to fucking Homedale and they'd be like, oh, let's go hang out and fucking blast music. And most of them would just stay around all the emo bands. They would be fans of the Maine and stuff. But I would have fucking died to just be like, I want to go sit down and see goddamn Bad Religion and Real Big Fish live at like 13 years old.
Yeah.
And maybe I wouldn't have been a libertarian until I was 15. Maybe, just maybe. But like, there were so many bands that were inspired by it. It sort of branched out from like skate punk and third wave ska to like third wave ska and emo to emo and like metalcore and a bunch of other bands beyond that. By the tail end, you had like 303 and Katy Perry, which sucked. But it was still like a lot of bands got their name out there. Sum 41, MCR, Machine Gun Kelly, unfortunately. A bunch of other bands came out of the Warped Tour scene. And then after that, you got all this explosion of post-hardcore bands that would later inspire emo. Hawthorne Heights, Thrice, AFI, The Used, Silverstein, Scary Kids, Scaring Kids. The list goes on. Dance Gavin Dance. Bunch of bands. And so now we're tying into kind of the tail end. And now, like, punk, it feels like every avenue of emotion has been explored. And at this point, it's sort of just kind of whatever existence of rock exists, the only bit that stays in the mainstream is bands that are kind of punk inspired.
Yeah.
Because, like,
I would agree.
Yeah, because, like, you know, say what you want about metal and how, like, metal gets disrespected by the mainstream all the time. Yeah, because you have guys in ghost costumes singing about love and death. Yeah, sure, Ghost, you're really cool and badass. But, Five Finger
badass.
I mean, Ghost is pretty bad. I didn't mean to shit on Ghost. Ghost is actually really cool. It's just, like, most of those bands ended up being like, Five Finger Death Punch or like new metal. New metal basically cut off the legs of metal's evolution. Yeah. Where it's like, oh, where else can we go from here? And that's when you get like kind of the second wave of grunge takeover, and you have Nickelback and Breaking Benjamin and all the really like sad metal-ish like emo bands kind of coming in. But like, you think about the bands that come out now that inspire the next generation, a lot of it's like the folk punk outfits from AJJ and taking sounds from Violent Femmes, or Bomb the Music Industry with ska and Jeff Rosenstock, who is the boy. I love Jeff Rosenstock. And you get a lot of these bands that, or fucking Titus Andronicus, for fuck's sake, all these bands that end up sort of like molding the sound of indie rock. Yeah. Ostensibly. Yeah. And so like the only other sort of things that are left over at this point, we have third wave ska. Which we didn't really get into that much, but back in the 90s, you had the explosion of Mighty Mighty Boss Tones and No Doubt and Sublime kind of bringing back ska. Yeah. So now you have Rancid taking the mainstream, but also too you have this whole other genre of bands that are very much inspired by The Special, very much inspired by Madness, but also take that energy of skate punk into it and incorporate it. Yeah. So you get Real Big Fish, Goldfinger, Less Than Jake becomes kind of the biggest deal out of them, Suicide Machines, and then even to this day, like fucking 3 years ago even, The Interpreters, who is a modern ska band who I really love, their song, She's Kerosene, makes the top 5 alternative rock songs in like 2018. I know no one listens to Billboard and no one listens to the radio, but that's an impressive feat.
Yeah.
They're also like mentored by Tim Armstrong from Rancid and Operation Ivy.
Yeah.
So they're really cool. Bomb the music industry, like influential to this day as being one of the seminal voices of modern punk. You get a bunch of other stuff too in the early 2000s. You have the New York art scene where you get like LCD Sound System and the Yeah Yeah Yeahs getting inspired from like the Talking Heads and television back from the 70s and the 80s. You get an influx in Celtic punk with Dropkick Murphys and Flogging Mollies, taking inspiration from the Pogues back in the 80s.
Yeah.
You get folk punk, which is sort of like was kind of like the only punk that was existing from like the years 2006 to like 2011 that I could remember was like Pat the Bunny and fucking AJJ and a lot of those bands. They were inspired by the Violent Femmes from the 80s.
Yeah.
So a lot of these bands ended up getting influences in the mid 2000s, and then the 2010s, it all kind of just divulged back to hardcore.
Yeah.
Hardcore kind of just took over, like either post-hardcore or hardcore itself.
Yeah.
So a lot of these bands now, like I'm very happy that at the very least by the tail end of the 2010s, we were getting sort of a resurgence of post-punk.
Yeah.
So a lot of the bands I sort of love that I still listen to now, like Idols, Shame, I have written back here as like bands to mention here. Got Shame and Idols and the Viagra Boys, who are coming out of the UK and Sweden respectively, who were very much taking like the sound of Pill and the sound of like Joy Division and giving like the raw intensity. Idols very much inspired by Crass. Shame very much inspired by Pill. Viagra Boys very much they're kind of their own thing, but they're cool. They're pretty like they're taking like the swagger approach. I can get a bit of the Pogues from them, but they could be anything. Australia. I didn't talk about Australian punk because I don't want to be here for 7 hours. It's already been a 10-hour podcast, probably. With 2 hours?
2 hours and 10 minutes.
I'm the longest episode yet.
Yes, you are.
Hell yeah. I am sorry. But you get...
It was an ambitious undertaking,
dude,
to say the least.
Like, I had a zine filled with shit to have to write. But you also have Australian punk. You have... like the Saints were big back in the 70s, and then they kind of like Australian punk kind of existed, but it wasn't really a big thing. By the mid to late 2010s, you were getting the Chats, you were getting King Gizzard and the Electric Lizard, who was more like rock metal, but they very much took inspiration from post-punk. You have Amelie, I think her name is, and the Sniffers, who are like a pub rock punk band. Some of the most intense live shows I've seen, like their lead singer, who's like a 5'4", maybe 90-pound woman, jumping into the crowd with the microphone still as people are like, it's nuts. It's nuts shit. Canada, you've got Pup, our boys Pup. Much love to Pup. I can't go without mentioning this. This is a shout out to Kevin Hall, who's, if he's even watching, but Spanish Love Songs.
Yep.
He got me into them.
Songs.
They're fantastic. Yeah. Awesome little band. And then, you know, in the hardcore front, you've got Turnstile, you've got Knocked Loose, you've got Code Orange, who are both kind of more metal inspired, but very much so like you got like, hardcore's still back. Hardcore still exists. This is Hardcore. It's an annual festival in Philly, I believe. Philly, where they just have like every hardcore band that ever existed ever perform there. Like Civ and Gorilla Biscuits have played there, I want to say 5 or 6 times. I think one year they had the Circle Jerks perform, which made me cry that I missed that. But you have like, you know, it's keeping hardcore alive. Yeah. A lot of these bands, I'm not even bringing up like the punk influences in Cambodia, in Bolivia, in Peru, in Venezuela. Like punk has finally like reached out to all these countries that like we fucked over, but are like poverty stricken.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, no, fuck yeah, punk rock. And so they're building movements out there. So there's Cambodian punk, there's Peruvian punk, there's Ecuadorian punk, for fuck's sake.
Everywhere, pretty much.
Punk is dominated.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's taken its only logical course with of course the death of punk rock when Green Day went to Broadway. And now there's a Green Day Broadway show, which was the knife in the heart of punk rock.
Would you call that the death of punk, or would you just call it the jumping the shark moment? I would call it's definitely jump
punk
shark.
rock is not anywhere where there's a kid who wants to tell you something. Like in a way, the term punk is not so much the music.
Yeah,
really. I mean, people could say a lot of hip hop roots are very punk rock.
Yeah,
you know, it's very DIY. It's very, I have something to say. You need to hear it. I'm gonna be aggressive and bombastic with it. You know, and that's why I like punk, just because it's people doing something. I always say you got to do something.
Yeah,
it's not like me like doing comedies because I'm just want to do something.
Exactly.
People need to do things. I think punk rock gave a lot of people an opportunity to take their life in their own hands
and give themselves a voice.
Yeah,
very much. You mentioned hip hop. I mean, the current SoundCloud scene is so fucking DIY.
Yeah,
like Chance the Rapper. Say what you want about his technical skill. Acid Rap's a great album. His newest one was bad, The Big Day or whatever. But he was all himself.
Yeah.
He's never signed to a major record label. He won Grammys by himself, doing his own production work. What's more fucking punk rock than that?
Yeah.
What's more punk rock than Little Pump becoming a millionaire off of goddamn releasing a SoundCloud hit?
Yeah.
Like, it's punk. It's punk fucking energy through and through.
Yeah. They even have the face tattoos.
Exactly. They have the face tattoo and the crippling drug addictions.
Yeah.
You know, just like early punk rock. All comes full circle.
Yeah.
History is doomed to repeat itself.
Yes, it is. So that's pretty much modern day.
That's basically it. We got through all of it except for the 50s, because who gives a shit about Chuck goddamn Berry? But that's it. Yeah. We did it.
All right.
I'm sorry I took so much time, but
it's quite all right. Well, that's the thing. Now we know.
Now we know.
The shooting star right here.
The more you know.
Yeah. Anything you want to plug?
I would plug my former podcast, Foul Housemates. At the moment, we are on an indefinite hiatus. I would say, that's an off the podcast conversation. But I'm working on another podcast at the moment. I'm working on another thing, and also you could follow me on Instagram as always. Any Liam in the world. It's kind of a cheesy name, but that's because I made it when I was, I don't know, like 18. Like I was just trying to have some sort of communication with people. But like, you can follow me there. Follow me on Twitter at RealUltraLiam. That's also a really terrible name. I need to find a way to change it. Help me. And I have a Twitch account, which I barely use, but I'm gonna try to. But as soon as I get my other podcast project off the ground, it's going to be a bad movie podcast.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, it's going to be a fun time. A comedy movie podcast about some of the worst movies ever released.
Yeah.
Movies so bad they tanked fucking companies and killed people and ruined relationships. And, it's going to be great. Yeah. So I hope to have you on, Tim.
Yeah,
It'd be a fun time.
I know nothing about movies, as you guys learned during Pal House. You guys were like, "Yeah, we're going to talk about horror movies." I was like, "I don't watch them.
I don't watch any. Sorry."
I was like, "Jeepers Creepers." I saw that.
I think.
Yeah.
But that's my plugs.
All right, very good. So this has been Time to Teach Tim. I got a show March 25th at Scotty's Comedy Cove.
I'm sorry.
Hit me up for tickets. It's going to be a good time. Say what you want. It'll be fun. All right, play us out, Tim.
Woo!
Tim's kinda dumb, let's help him get smart. It's time to teach Tim stuff.
Hell yeah.